afternoon, and this is yes. Welcome. I understand it's a time of year when a lot of people are busy with other things and traveling, but I'm glad we have Tim here from Department of Communications in Simpson, and Mihai Hao, who's from Management. Yes, and we got to get talking to each other afterward. He's got a project he's working on Bhutan, and we're working on data from Bhutan. And then we have a number of students, and glad to see you all here. And today's lecture, I've got to take out my glasses to see it, is directed at the faculty, and the title is Global Vision, Local Action, Enhancing International Collaboration and Research and Outreach. So I asked Professor Cooren to talk about his collaboration. He's a very well-known international scholar and has many connections, such as most well-known is his work with the International Communication Association as a past president, but many other associations. And so I'm not going to read all, I'll just read a little bit from the abstract. What he writes is that in today's knowledge economy, meaningful international collaboration is not just beneficial, it is essential. Drawing on my experience as a Canadian scholar and former president of ICA, this talk explores concrete strategies for building or cultivating more internationally engaged research culture, from building equitable global partnerships to navigating the complexities of cross-cultural collaboration. I'll explore how institutions like University of Macau can amplify their global research presence while staying rooted in local relevance. The session will offer both high-level reflections and practical recommendations. And so I've asked that we have a recording of this, and Jimmy is manning the camera there, so that we can show this video. If you do not want yourself to be shown, let us know. We will try to blur you a little bit later, but I think we're okay. There's no secrets here, no sensitive words, I don't think. And so, hand it over to Professor François Cooren.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Todd, and again, thank you for this invitation. It's a very generous invitation. I've been enjoying my stay in Macau, at the University of Macau, and met very interesting people, and very happy to be here. So the title is a little bit pompous and maybe pretentious, but so I hope you won't mind, but I'm going to do something I usually don't do that much, which is to speak about myself. I like to speak about my ideas, but to speak about my trajectory, it's a little bit awkward for me, but I'm going to do it anyway, because when Todd told me that I had to speak about internationalization, and we talked a little bit together about this theme, it was a very, for me, intimidating, I have to say, because I'm not used to speaking about that. And so I thought that the best way to talk about internationalization would be to talk about how I internationalize myself, so to speak, which is a way, because when your university gets more and more international, when your research is getting more and more international, it's basically through yourself, your work, your body, and so on and so forth. So I thought the best way would be to speak about that. So I hope you won't mind. Don't take it as a self-serving way of promoting myself. It's more to give you an example of how this happened to me, to some extent. Okay. So basically, very simply, I will start with the beginning, which is I'm not actually Canadian. I'm from France originally. I was born in Lille, northern France, very close to Belgium. Belgium is here, the United Kingdom is here, England is here, Germany. I basically spent 23 years of my life in Lille. I mean, I was traveling a little. For example, I was doing judo and I went to Japan at some point, so I had some experiences of the world, so to speak. But I remained at the University of Lille, and I actually did a master's degree in engineering. which is weird because now I'm a communication scholar. But again, it's to show you how life is full of surprises sometimes. And so not very international at the beginning. And I did, like at that time, many people had to do that in France. I did my military service when I was 23 years old after the completion of my degree. And was it a loss of time? Some people could present it that way, spend 1 year military service. But in my case, I think it served me well because retrospectively, that's how I got out of engineering. And I was very good. I think I was quite good in engineering, but I didn't like it very much, to be frank. So and this 1 year gave me some time to think about my life and what I wanted to do. And basically, I moved to Paris, and it was the first time where I spent 1 year outside of Lille. I was 24 years old, and I spent 1 year in Paris, and I did a degree in scientific communication. So for me, it was a way to basically go from engineering to what I wanted. At that time, I wanted to become a journalist. I wanted to be basically, trying to popularize science to make it more accessible to people. There was already this idea of communicating science to people who don't necessarily know much about science. So that's what I did from 1989 to 1990. I did that at the University of Paris, which is this campus here. And I did also a master's degree in technological education, which allowed me to basically go for the first time in another continent as a student. And that's where I discovered Montreal. Okay, so basically I arrived in 1990 in Montreal to complete a kind of exchange program. So that's my first really internationalization. That would be it, I guess, where I really first left the country for what I thought at that time that it would be so for 6 months, and I ended up spending 6 years in Canada because what I did basically is I met my advisor, my future advisor, Jim Taylor. Unfortunately, he died 3 years ago now. He was old when he died, but he was 93 years old. And that's how I met him. I took a class, one of his courses, and I think he liked what I wrote. And he's the one, curiously, who asked me, do you want to do a PhD? And I will remember all my life, I said, the first time he asked me that, I said, no, I don't think I want to do a PhD. And then it's after thinking about it, 1 month later, I said, oh, why not? And so that's how I ended up doing this PhD with him. So from 1991 to 1995, I completed a PhD in communication at the University of Montreal. And maybe you don't know, but at the University of Montreal, everything is taking place in French. Because Quebec is a French-speaking province of Canada. Canada is officially a bilingual country. So even if I was an international student, I was still basically speaking French, which was very reassuring. And one of the reasons why I went to Quebec is actually that my English was not that good. And so it was, even if Jim Taylor was an English-speaking scholar, he was actually teaching in French and he was functioning in French. So this is the so you see, so international, but yeah, it's international, but not multilingual. My English was very poor at that time. Then I went, after my doctoral degree in communication, more precisely in organizational communication, I went back to Europe, and I did a postdoctoral degree at the University, Catholic University of Louvain-la-Neuve. And then I came back to Canada after 4 or 5 months, and got my first position as a lecturer at the Université de Sherbrooke in Canada. So basically a little town east of Montreal. And that's where it's becoming more international. I got my first position as a prof at the University of Cincinnati, in Ohio. And then I got my second position at the University at Albany, New York, tenure track assistant professor position basically where I became an associate professor. So that's really when I started to get international, I guess, and when also I learned to speak English a little better. I was forced to learn English, as you can imagine. I still don't know how they managed to hire me. I'm not sure I would have hired myself because my English was not that good. Sorry, this is a mistake I made. And I went back in 2003 to the Université of Montréal, which is what my alma mater to some extent. Okay. So I spent 7 years in the States, 1.5 years in Cincinnati, and then 5.5 years in Albany, New York. But then I came back to Montreal as an associate professor, and I basically became an interim chair, and then full professor, and then the chair of my department for 3 terms. So I was very busy in terms of administration, but what was important for me is that even if I was doing a lot of administrative work, it was important for me to keep publishing and doing research. So I was ready to serve my department as a full professor, because I think it's important, but it was very important also for me to keep doing research, which I'm still doing today. So in terms of, how you become more international, because that's basically what I'm asked, what I was asked to talk about. Well, my first, obviously as a young scholar, as a young researcher, you're trying to grasp as many opportunities as you can, okay, to make your work recognized and hopefully renowned. I was very lucky. I was asked in 2005, so I was already at the Université de Montréal, at the University of Montreal at that time. I was asked to become the editor-in-chief of Communication Theory, which is one of the top journals of ICA. I'm pretty sure most of you know ICA, the International Communication Association. And I have been going, I will talk about that later, but I have been going to ICA since 1994. In 1994, I was in Montreal, and my English was very, very poor again. And I was still going to ICA because I thought it was important to go and to meet people, speak with them, and so on. And you will see that there are some connections here. And it was thanks to this position of editor-in-chief of Communication Theory that I was approached to become ICA president. Okay, so I think that this kind of moment where you accept to take the responsibility of an important journal, and progressively people know what you're doing for the association. That's how it works. They know what you're doing for the association. So hopefully, and in my mind, I was not really thinking about that, to be frank. I didn't have any aspiration to become ICA president. I didn't think it would be possible, actually. But for some reason, they asked me to become one of the 2 nominees for the position. There were 2 of us. There was one person from Singapore, Nanyang Technological University, and I was the other candidate. I thought they would choose the Singaporean professor, but the ICA members chose me for them. So I basically became ICA President-elect Select in 2008. Okay, I had just become a full professor, basically so when you become an ICA President, you have to spend 5 years on the board, basically the executive, what they call the executive board. Okay, so I remained, even if I was just acting president, I will show you from 2010 to 2011, I actually remained on the board from 2008 to 2013, so for 5 years. I also organized an ICA conference in Singapore, not too far from here, relatively. Okay, so it was quite an experience for me. I remember I had to choose a hotel, it was quite an experience for me to choose a hotel where all the people all the participants would stay. But yes, that was quite an experience. So when you become ICA president, one of your responsibilities is to organize a conference. Okay? And of course, you have the staff of ICA who is there to help you out. But you are basically one of the persons who is making big decisions in these circumstances. Also in 2013, in terms of internationalization, I became an ICA fellow. ICA fellow is typically something that it's a kind of honorific title. When you become president, you will not necessarily become an ICA fellow, but it's based on your work and also what you did for the association. So I became an ICA fellow in 2013. Todd mentioned that I was also involved in other associations. I was a member of the International Association for Dialogue Analysis, also called IADA, or IADA, depending on how you want to spell it or pronounce it. And I became, in 2011, president of this association. That was also a way for me. So this one is more niche. The IADA is a much smaller association. Sometimes we have a conference where there will be something like 150 people, but it's a big one, 150 people. While ICA, usually you have 4,000, 5,000 participants, and in terms of membership, you have something like 7,000 people, so it's much bigger. Okay. But this one is a small association, and sometimes small associations are very interesting also in terms of international outreach and again, I was not, is it strategic to do that? I will tell you after, maybe it's a kind of flow, but it can also be a quality, is I tend to say yes when people ask me to do stuff. So sometimes it's a flow because you realize you don't have much time. When I say no, it's really that I don't have the time, and I feel that it's too much. But I tend to have this kind of by default to say, in France we had a song when I was little. The song was something like "Go where the wind makes you go." I don't know if it's the right translation, but follow the wind, basically. So it's kind of maybe a kind of principle. And also, I was in 2017 named the Distinguished Scholar of the National Communication Association. Again, the National Communication Association, I don't know if you're aware of it, it's a national communication association. So at first sight, it's an American communication association, but actually there are a lot of international scholars. And to some extent, it's a much bigger, it's not to some extent, it's actually a much bigger conference. There are up to 8,000 participants, while ICA is usually 5,000 maximum. So it's a much bigger conference. And in 2017, I also was named Distinguished Scholar for this association. And finally, one of the curiously, it's a more national fellowship. It's a Royal Society of Canada that I became a member. And why I like that very much, because it's not only communication, it's all the disciplines are represented at the Royal Society of Canada. For me, it was important to become a member, of course, obviously for myself, but also because there is not that many communication scholars represented in this fellowship. So for me, it was also a way to make communication more visible at the Canadian level. So even if it's a national recognition, I tend to almost like it the most to some extent, because it's So in terms of publication, because also you can speak about abstractly about internationalization, but internationalization is mostly through your work. Okay, is your work recognized? Is your work cited? We all know now. I didn't have that when I started as a professor. Obviously, I think it started 10 years ago, maybe something like that, or maybe more, or maybe I was not aware of it before. But yeah, suddenly you have, you put your name in Google Scholar, and Google Scholar calculates for you this kind of indexes, And you know how many people cited your work, I mean not how many people, how many articles or book chapters or books cited your work for the past maybe 25 years in my case. And then you also have the information since 2020. So that's also how you get more international. People know you. People know your work. They cite your work. Okay. So for that also, am I strategic? I'm not sure I'm very strategic about it. I tend to publish books, book chapter, and articles. Today, people say you should just publish articles because that's what counts and nothing else. And I'm not in the shoes of a young scholar, so I understand that. If I were a young scholar, maybe I would say no to any book project or any book chapter project because I would be told it doesn't count. The advantage is that in my university, it counts. Okay, there is no such thing as a list of journals where you have to publish, or where they say no books are not recognized, or book chapters are not recognized. No. And I think it's very nice that they let people decide where they want to publish, even if, of course, when you're going to get, promoted, they are going to look at it and say, maybe you just published book chapters. You could have done a little more in terms of articles, for example, because people know that it might be easier to have book chapters published than articles. So, but I think it's a little bit unfortunate. For example, I have a colleague in France. When I publish with him, and he's a former student, so sometimes I publish with him. And I said, well, maybe we could publish there. And he said, no, it doesn't count for me. So we cannot publish there. And so you have this kind of mixed message. For example, there are universities that say, oh, we should be more interdisciplinary. Let's promote interdisciplinarity. And then, yes, but then if you publish in a journal from another discipline, they are going to say, oh, but it doesn't count. So it's kind of, completely mixed message and contradictory message because they want your work to be interdisciplinary. I'm not saying that's the ground message of all the universities, but many universities have this kind of position. But at the same time, they create a rule that actually prevents you from really do this kind of interdisciplinary work. So I find that unfortunate. And for that, I really like the system in my university where they trust their faculty to evaluate the work of their peers and say, their peers, they publish in book chapters, but they have also articles and they have also books. And it's good to have all these things. Okay? So if I would be asked whether it's, for example, also here, as I say, the journal I publish in French sometimes, not a lot. 17% are in French, 83% are in English. But I have colleagues, it's the opposite, they mostly publish in French. And it's fine, the university, I'm not saying they love it, but they recognize it. Okay? And we are not, we are comparable to the University of Macau in terms of, ranking. So I don't think it affects necessarily the ranking to have these rules of where you have to publish absolutely. Actually, we have a good ranking in terms of, we are between 100 and 200 in most rankings, and sometimes even in the first 100 for some of them. So. And also what I did is guest edited special issues. Sometimes it can be, for example, one of my most cited work is actually an introduction to a special issue. So sometimes you have this kind of surprises. So in terms of presentation, also when you want to become, try to make your university more international and yourself, because that's a saying in many respects. University is becoming more international through what you're doing. So I was asked to, give keynotes. I was invited by university, thanks to Todd, for example, and also presenting in international conferences. Okay, so that's something you should not also. I hope the university is helping you with that, students or scholars, to participate in international conferences. For example, Todd is very well known in the language and social interaction division, and not only in this division, in other divisions, because he's chairing the LSI division, for example. So, this kind of move is always good when you are ready to serve your institution. So we have this word, I'm sorry to use a French word, but because we don't have an equivalent in English. In French, we call that rayonnement. So rayonnement, it's one of the, so I'm going to show you the whole, sorry. One of the criteria according to which we are evaluated is rayonnement. And rayonnement literally means radiation or radiance. For example, you're going to speak about the rayonnement du soleil, the radiation of the sun, or the ray of the sun. So, a faculty member in my university is supposed to radiate, okay? Meaning that this person needs to make his work or her work or their work known outside of the university, obviously, and in terms of provincially, nationally, and internationally. And we are basically evaluated according to 4 criteria. I'm pretty sure it's the same at the University of Macau, but maybe not. In terms of research, it's the funding and publications. In terms of teaching, are you a good teacher or not? You have good grades as a teacher. In terms of administration, are you doing something for your institution? Are you a good soldier, so to speak? And rayonnement. Rayonnement is, are you radiating? In terms of, is your work radiating? So why am I saying that? Because you see here I was saying we are all one and many, okay? And one of my favorite metaphors to speak about communication is basically to talk about eventual equation, okay? So I'm going to just, because I spoke about eventual equation last week, but so I won't spend the next hour talking about that. But what I mean is that whenever I act in a formal context, obviously, or whenever I speak in a formal context, it's also the University of Montreal, in many respects, that speaks through me. I mean, I exaggerate because I'm not a formal representative. I'm not the president of my university, but in many respects, I represent my university here, okay? I'm talking to some extent on its behalf, okay? And I think what is true of my university is true of your university, obviously, okay? Whenever we are in a formal context, in a conference, invited to speak in a university, and so on, we are, in many respects, representing the university, that is making it present, okay? So that's why we are one and many at the same time. So what are the strategies, if I may use this word, maybe too, strategy, I think it's a little bit pompous, it's a little bit pretentious. So, but, certainly one thing is to attend conferences. I was talking about that at the beginning. I got my first job in an American university because I met this woman, Gail Fairhurst, who was at that time the chair of the Department of Communication at the University of Cincinnati. She knew I had, I happened to win my dissertation, won the best dissertation award of the Organizational Communication Division, so she knew my work, even if I could hardly talk to her at the time. And she took a chance. That's where, really, again, when I say I wouldn't have hired myself, I really mean it. And when I arrived in Cincinnati, my English was not that great. But still, because I went regularly to these conferences, she knew me as this kind of odd French guy who was very shy and, didn't speak very much English. So that's one of the things you need to do sometimes is, in your case, I'm sure most of you are much better in English than I was at that time, so But try to meet people. Sometimes there is people. I remember as a young student, I was so timid and shy. I didn't dare to talk to these big professors. And I'm not saying today I'm a big professor, but let's say I grew up a little, and there is nothing that I love more than to have a student who come to speak to me about his or her work or their work, and we have a conversation. So, and it's something I was completely panicked of doing, when I think retrospectively of it. So please don't hesitate to do that. Again, most faculty members, they love to talk about their work and your work also. So that's something I would certainly recommend. I also always, to be frank, I'm boycotting NCAs this year because of what's happening in the United States, but most of the time I attend IC conference and NCA conferences every year. I think it's important and also to attend the business meetings. It's very important. Each division normally has a business meeting. The business meeting is boring most of the time, but it's a place where you meet people, where you can see everyone, because most people, they won't go to all the sessions, all the panels, but usually they go to the business meeting to know what's going on with the association, to know what's going on with the division, and so on and so forth. As I said, I said yes to all the invitations to serve. I actually, I was the vice chair of the LSI division, like Todd. I did it a long time ago in 2004. So again, that's what helped me. I organized also some LSI conferences and even a joint conference with Outcome. My second book, edited book, came out of joint LSI Outcome pre-conference. So sometimes it's you retrospectively discover things, and it's again, is it a strategy? Not sure, but since you tend to say yes, things happen. I would say that maybe the things that happen. Also, I'm going to speak about the CCO. CCO, maybe you remember from last week. CCO is for Communicative Constitution of Organization. That's a movement. We could call that a research movement. That was created, I think we can say that by Jim Taylor, my advisor. Basically that's something that became more and more international. Okay, he started his first book. That's why I put it in French. Une organisation des tissus de communication, which means an organization is nothing but a mesh of communication, a network of communication, a fabric of communication. So he had this idea that communication is essential for an organization. And so his first book was in 1988. Nobody read it. It was in French, published by the Université of Montréal, completely under the radar. Nobody read it. But then he started to. I was lucky because I became a his student in 1991, and so he started to progressively publish more and more. And his groundbreaking work is this one. It was a big. He received the ICA Fellow Book Award for it. And until his death, I cannot say that. After this book, basically, is productivity affair. But when I met him, he was his age. When I became a student, he was already 62 years old. So because he hadn't published a lot before. So I was very lucky to that extent because he remained very productive during 20 years after I met him until he was 82, 83 years old. He was still productive. But so he created what we call today the CCO movement, okay, which is an international movement of research. And I won't spend too much time on explaining it because again, that's what I did last time. And retrospectively, okay, what put us on the map? is because in 1994, there was an ICA conference. It was my first, actually, international conference. And I got some money to fly to Australia in Sydney as a student. I was still a PhD student. And we made this presentation, which was a top paper of the ORCOM division, the Organization of Communication division. And it was called Our Organization and Communication Equivalent, an Exploratory Response to Risk Question. Okay? And from this, basically, because of this top paper, Jim decided to submit it to communication theory. Communication theory, if you remember, I became the editor-in-chief of this journal. So basically, 1996. So basically, 10 years later, I became the editor-in-chief of this journal. But so it was the article that retrospectively put us on the map. It's highly cited even today, and it's usually considered the kind of founding argument about this approach. Okay, basically, and it's called the communicational basis of organization between the conversation and the text. And progressively, we started, in terms of internationalization, we started to publish more and more articles, more and more books. Today we are known as the Montreal School, for example. The term Montreal School is not our term. It's a term that a scholar used to speak about what we represented at that time. It's Dennis Munby. Maybe some of you know his work. He's a critical scholar. And he used this term, the Montreal School, to speak about us, and there was nothing we could do about it. And is it good, is it bad? I guess there is a good side, because, people talk about us, but there is maybe a bad side because people talk about us also. Also, the CCO, it was not even our term either. CCO, the expression communication as constitutive organization, was first used by McPhee and Zog to criticize our ideas. So sometimes it's funny because somebody is using a term to criticize you, and then this term is sticking. And then today, when we speak about CCO, anybody, organizational communication, know what we are talking about. Not only that, but even in organization studies, I wouldn't say that everybody knows about the CCO, but you have many people who are interested in interaction, communication, management. They know about this expression. Okay, so again, it's funny because it's something that didn't come from us. Again, that was used to speak about our work in terms of response and critique of our work. Also, what made it more and more official, there is an article that speaks about the institutionalization of the CCO movement. And it's not this one, but to speak about how it become more and more institutional, so to speak. Well, this book is important too. Building Theories of Organization, the Constitutive Role of Communication, published in 2009 by Linda Putnam and Cotera. They were editors. So there were chapters in this book where basically the people who are talking about CCO were present. And James Taylor, my brother, were pretty pissed off. You know why he was pretty pissed off? Because look at the contents. First, Linda Putnam, Annie Cotera, McPhee. Then prominently the work of McPhee and the student. And then the work again of McPhee and Joel Iverson, the student. Then the work of people who are using this framework. And then only chapter 5, my work, with Pierre Ferrer, the person I introduced you first. Then James Taylor, chapter 6. And finally, a chapter by Linda Putnam and Nicotera. So again, you see, it's good and it's bad because Jim said, they're talking about CCO, they are appropriating this work for their own sake. I mean, he never said that to Linda Putnam and Nicotera, but he told me that, he said, he felt dispossessed. And it's something, why I'm talking about that, because dispossession is something that will happen. Obviously, it will happen if your work starts to be well-known, people are going to ventriloquize you in surprising ways. They are going to talk about what you're doing, they are going to steal some of your ideas, and I think it's fine. Personally, I cannot say I welcome it, but there will be treason, and if you want to control everything, it won't work anyway. In Italian, they have this beautiful expression, traduttore traditore, which means the translator is a traitor. And I think it's precisely that. You have to acknowledge and recognize and accept that your work is going to be betrayed because it's going to be used for other sakes, other purposes. So again, I try to tell the story of the CCO movement here. Also a big moment, retrospectively, of this movement is what happened in 2012 in Hamburg, north of Germany, where basically I was invited with McPhee. McPhee is the guy who criticized the CCO movement at the beginning, and David Siddall. Some people who are familiar with Luhmann's work might know David Siddall. He's a Luhmannian. Some people call it a Luhmanniac. And you have these two young scholars at that time who were organizing this little workshop. It was a workshop, basically. And why I talk about it? Because it was a way for us to confront our ideas, and also, retrospectively, they published this article in Management Communication Quarterly, which was, again, you see the CCO movement, now there are 3 schools. At the beginning, there was just maybe Montreal, the Montreal school, but now there was basically Anthony Giddens, famous sociologist, the Luhmannian Niklas Luhmann, and Jim Taylor's work, or the way I talked about it, is present in my work. Okay, so basically you have a movement like that starts to evolve. You have no control over that, because people are starting to make comparisons. Oh, what you're doing is actually pretty close to what Niklas Luhmann has been saying for the past 40 years. Oh, yes, well, maybe not, maybe yes, And suddenly you are becoming, again, you have no control, You could be as strategic as you want, You are going with the flow, and that's my position. Also, very important, at the same time, this was in 2014, and also in 2013, there was something important for this movement, where it became an official sub-theme of the EGOS. EGOS, I don't know if you know this association. You know, it's a European Group of Organization Studies. Okay, it's a very important. It's the equivalent of the Academy of Management in the United States. It's a very important association in management and organization. So it's in Europe, but people from all over the world are going. And so it became an official sub-theme. And since 2013, basically for the past 12 years now, it has been, going back over and over. So people are meeting every year to speak about CCO. And they publish, they talk about it, again, no control over that, just participate in it, it's becoming something. I'm sure maybe, who knows, in 10 years nobody might talk about it, And in terms of institutionalization, you see, for example, there was a handbook that was published in 2022. Joel Basque and Ben Cherki, they are former students. One of a colleague of mine, Joel Basque, Ben Cherki is one of my former PhD students. And Timothy Kuhn is a professor. They are all 3 of them professors. Timothy Kuhn is a professor at the University of Colorado Boulder. And they published this book about the handbook of the communicative constitution of organization. So again, you see how suddenly now there is even a handbook about it. When you look at the 1988 book in French from Jim Taylor to 2022, 40 years later, 34 4 years later, you have something that he could not even imagine, show Jim today. So if you look at the Montreal school, I just put that to show how it works. Basically, I was Jean. So the arrow means I was advised by. So I was advised by him. Daniel Robichaud, Hélène Giroux. But also I advise these people who became themselves professors and who are obviously publishing about not only that, but they have their own voice. They do other work. But they basically have themselves students, so sometimes you can become a grandfather or a great-grandfather. So it's interesting in terms of ideas, how it evolves. And you have also what we call friendly others, who are not necessarily part of the Montreal school, but who know our work, cite the work, who are basically saying in some respect the same thing, participating in this movement. For example, you have Tim Kuhn, I was talking about, the co-editor of the handbook. So people basically, yes, who were influenced. I think at the end of the day also, we can talk about internationalization as much as we want, but at some point it needs to resonate with people. Your work, and by you I mean the work of your movement, research movement, has to, what do you want to say? As a research expert. Your work has to resonate, your work needs to inspire other people, And this you cannot, again, that's something also you cannot control. You can try to do as much as you want, but it needs to be inspiring to other people. So what can I try to, I don't know what, I guess it's fine in terms of time. The communicative dimension of that, because so far I'm speaking a lot about our work as communication scholars, but what can we say about internationalization? That's the point I'm trying to make now. But again, we are not just actors, but also passers. I've been saying that last week, I'm saying it again. I mean, in many ways, my theoretical ideas inspire what I'm doing, and what I'm doing inspires my work, my ideas. What I mean by we are not just actors, but also passers, I mean precisely that we are doing a lot of stuff, we are active, but we are also basically animating a lot of things when we do that. We are expressing a lot of ideas, we are becoming the spokesperson of specific institutions, specific ideas, other scholars, and that's how it works, internationalization. People are becoming your ventriloquists. They are going to make you say things. You are going to try to make them say things. I mean, you are constantly in a kind of ventriloquial game. So that's what I mean by actors and passers. So there is kind of shared authorship, Again, I know some people who always try to control. I think that's a mistake. You can try to be as faithful to your work as possible. You can try to define your ideas, but don't try to control the network. I think it's a mistake. I speak also about the strategy of the week. Why do I speak about that? Because to some extent, Canadian scholars, they know how to work with the beast. They know how to work with a big brother in the South. I mean, they know. I don't know if you can say they know, but they try to. Or they try to, they know that they are the weak in the situation, That's, it's not by chance that Trump wants to make Canada the 51st state, because he knows that we rely a lot on the United States for many things, and we know how powerless we are to some extent in comparison to the United States. And, to be a Canadian scholar in this environment, it's an asset, it's an advantage for sure. We are neighbors, so we know how it works. But at the same time, like what happened with the book, the 2009 book, where suddenly our work was kind of swallowed by a project that was mainly an American project. So you could have reacted two ways with that. You could have said, no, you are betraying us, we don't want to be any part of it, go to hell. Or we could say, we are going to play the game. We are going to, again, the strategy of the week, try to, make our way, and retrospectively it worked. I think you could say that, Maybe one day it won't work, but that's what we have been doing, trying to find as many opportunities as we could to make our work known and recognized. Begin with small collaborations. We always say, and in the title it was a little bit that, we think to think globally and act locally. I know it's kind of very cliché to say that, to think globally, act locally. But so begin with small collaboration. Begin with just to have an opportunity to work with one person in another university, and it's maybe an American university, but maybe a New Zealander university, or maybe an Australian university. You don't need to go blunt. Big steps. You can be baby steps. Sometimes it's working to be. To do that progressively. Use conferences as a relational node. Sorry for the mistake here. Nurture trust and respect. I think it's very important in this kind of environment that people can rely on you. So many times not so many times, but I had some experiences where I collaborated with someone and it was a disaster because this person was not responding to his email. He was basically not reliable, and then the collaboration collapses, basically, and it doesn't work. So people have to trust you. People have to know they can rely on you. You're saying you're going to do something, you're going to do it. I know I'm saying the obvious, I'm stating the obvious, but even if it's obvious, so many people I see that don't do that, that things that are going to magically happen because they are involved in it. And again, as I kept saying throughout my presentation, let people appropriate your work and don't try to control everything. Okay? Go with the wind in many respects. So, internationalization as a form of dialogue, where dialogue means in two directions. You have also to acknowledge what other people are saying, obviously. You have to take into account what they are saying. So a form of co-action. And hopefully this resonates. You start to make this kind of, you realize that you created something you have no control on, but there is some form of resonance, okay? And maybe some form of radiation. So thank you very much. I hope it was not too boring and again too self-serving, but it was my way to respond to the agenda that Todd American gave me, so I hope it was okay.
Thank you very much. Maybe you can take a seat if you want to take a little break. Yeah, thank you so much, and for many very insightful explanations of where you came from. Especially for young scholars, I recall the similar feeling. We go to conferences.